Hello, welcome everyone to tonight's conversation, well, nearly night. I'm Kelly Kivland, curator at DIA, and it is such a pleasure to be in the company of Barbara Bloom this evening, and I'm really looking forward to talking more about her 2008 artist web project, Half Full, Half Empty, which takes absence, domesticity, and time as its focus. Our conversation aligns with the 25th anniversary of the Artist Web Project series, something very beloved to DIA, as well as the recent restoration initiative involving previously Flash-based works, including Bloom's. This series has been, as I said, a continuous commissioning series since 1995, and we've been giving renewed attention to it over the last several years, given changes in many of the browsers that we work in, and many of those projects being Flash. And this is an inauguration of many of the converted projects that we've been working on over the last several months and several years, really. And we're really excited to re-engage with these projects, as well as celebrate the 25th anniversary of this beloved series. I want to also thank my colleagues for their assistance with tonight's program: Theodora Lang, Claudia Schaefer-Travaux, Andrea Villa, Max Sinone, and of course, Sarah Tucker. Sarah Tucker, who is DIA's Director of Information Technology, has been with DIA for a long time and has actually been integral to the DIA's Artist Web Projects series, especially, of course, and also this project in particular. Just a bit of background on this project. Half Full, Half Empty presents three parallel parallel dialogues that occur at different points in time: past, present, and future. Using the visual platform as a stage, the viewer encounters a dining table, as you see here, a digital still life, which people are absent, yet their actions are implied by the movements of the objects. And those that helped Barbara to realize this project, including, of course, Sarah, but also John Haskell for the script collaboration, Gregory King, who helped in video directing, After Effects, and editing, David Teague helped with the lighting, Pravin Sathik and Smita Sathi for programming, and for the audio voiceovers, which we'll hear in just a moment, Mehong Bloom and Braden Donian, is that how you say their last name?
Denoyan,
there we go, for the past voices, Jane Friesen and John Haskell for the present voices, and Michael Lambert and Matthew Lewis for the future voices, and Chris Mann for the audio recording and editing. And a little bit about Barbara for those that need a little bit more information. Though enthusiastically visual, Bloom has said her work stems more from the traditions of literature than it does from fields of painting or sculpture. She has participated in numerous solo and group exhibitions at major national and international institutions, including, of course, the Met in New York, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Serpentine Gallery in London, the Stedelijk in Amsterdam, the Kunsthalle Zurich, Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, and the Kunstverein Munich, just to name a few. And she lives in New York City. So Barbara, let's begin. I want to begin. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's really a pleasure. I know when I reached out to invite you to partake in the conversation, it was really very much because I had been revisiting the project through the conservation effort, and I just felt it was an incredibly prescient project for this moment, a moment in which I and many others have been spending much of their time in their own domestic space, having conversations, thinking about nostalgia and absence. And I know that one of the major inspirations for this particular piece was Harold Pinter's classic 1978 play, Betrayal. I myself saw this production many years ago when I was an undergrad studying abroad in Australia. And I remember leaving the play feeling the heaviness of adulthood. And for those that don't know, the play itself reverses events from 77 to 1969. And it very much focuses on the lives of just three characters. Can we begin just by talking about how this play influenced the work?
Sure. When I first started talking with Lynn Cook and Sarah Tucker about doing a piece for the web, I talked with them about this play Betrayal because I'd been thinking about it for a very long time. I was particularly interested in the play because of its movement backwards in time. And every production I'd ever seen of it, or there's a movie that's made of it, has a pretty standard staging that takes place, in that the actions just take place and then you go back and you go back. And what's interesting about the nature of it is that as an audience, you are privy to things that you know will have happened. And so you know things that the characters don't know, sort of like in a Punch and Judy play, that you know, oh, no, don't do that, because you know what's going to happen. So you are already sort of withholding the information to the players because you know more than they know. And so that sense of withholding information is already present in somebody watching or reading the play, that you know things that they don't know and you're not telling. And so all of the stuff of withholding information, withholding being silent is a big part of Pinter's plays to begin with, but this one in particular. And I imagined at some point, wouldn't it be interesting to stage the play moving backwards in time in one room, in one area, in which all of the props and all of the staging would remain on the stage where they had fallen. A chair falls over, a glass falls over, something fills, all of the things that happen in the act of making the story, but they would remain on the stage. And they would remain on the stage not as markers of the past, but as markers of the future. And so you would have a build-up from the future, reminding you of what is going to happen at all times, or reminding you, oh yes, he gave her that shawl at that point, but we're then back further in time, and then they're talking about something, and then you have all these references to the future. And so that was the first thing that I was thinking about, because the nature of my work, I do use objects, and objects as carriers of meaning or carriers of narrative, but I don't get to have them move. They stay still, and that's always kind of frustrating for me, or that's the part of the frustration, or part of what I have to deal with, is each time to deal with how to animate objects in terms of some implied narrative for the viewer in their minds. But so I thought, oh yay, I can do something on the web and they could actually move. And we tried for quite a long time to get the rights to do Betrayal. And it was unfortunately just after Pinter died, right after he died, right before and after he died, and it just became impossible. So we kind of gave up on that. And my first thought was, okay, well, we'll just write a Pinter-esque thing. Well, that turns out, of course, not to be as easy as that. So it morphed into this, and I went to John Haskell, as a writer whose work I like very much, to talk with him about writing dialogues that would take place in the present, the past, and the future. And so what we attempted to do was to have this, it's always a man and a woman. They know each other very well. There's implied that there may be family. They're very, very familiar with each other. So either brother and sister, or married, or anyway, these two people have known each other their entire lives. And so we hear them in the present, and we hear them as adults. We hear them as children in the past, and we hear them as elderly adults in the future. And it's not the same conversation that they're having, but it's similar enough. It's all held together by a game that they're guessing, that there's a box, that the box, a gift falls down and you have to guess what's in the box. So that holds it together. But they also make references to similar things. They're maybe in some kind of a vacation home, or it's vague as to where they are. In the same, go ahead.
Should we bring people into the project a little bit? And
Sure, yeah.
Okay, maybe we can go to the present.
Remember, I want to ride in it every day?
Check in the outside pocket?
I'll find it, and then let's go out. We can take the Juniper shortcut. Then we can sit out on the dock, and I'll take pictures.
Hey, remember that time we sat out there? With those cheese sandwiches? You drop little pieces of bread into the water, and well, at first the fish didn't know what it was. But then they all came around, and I don't know, remember that?
These frocklets are so slimy. One more guess. Is it toothpicks? Colder. Let's not forget those buckets. The orange buckets are good because they won't jump out.
It's beautiful here, that's the point.
We could just sit out there till it's dark.
We could. God, that fish, it was so orange. The rest of them were brown and dull, but the sunlight on that one shiny fish.
Take another guess.
So should we...
An ashtray.
An ashtray?
I don't know.
Can you share, I mean, one of the things that's so compelling are the objects, of course, and that's how we're presented with, and how they move and appear and disappear. They're very much the protagonists, the characters in this narrative. How did you go about choosing these particular objects, or this still life in itself?
They're partially just the ordinary things that one would have around, that would sit on a table. Just because they're just the ordinary things that one would have around. But they're... I coined this term visual innuendo, and innuendo is that kind of hint or implication or something that's alluded to. But I like the idea that you could do that visually. And so in a lot of my work, there are footprints or fingerprints or shadows or palimpsests or reflections or traces of the people who are not there. And in this case, the people that move these objects are not there, and so these objects kind of allude to not a particular story, but they allude to the story of what's the action behind these things. So when the glass fills, or there's a ball that rolls in, or I thought about objects that could have some kind of movement to them too. There's a book that falls. There's and then the grapes, as in classical still lifes, there's always the fruit there, but these grapes slowly get eaten. One by one, every once in a while, you don't see a hand come in to eat, but a grape will disappear, and then at some points, I don't want. This is sort of like the giveaway of the high points of the things, but there's also reflections in the glasses. So we see reflections of what's outside of the frame, and I think of it. This is kind of a contemporary still life. Of course, I looked at still life paintings, and to look at what are the elements that are normally in a still life painting. But these are sort of, I think of this like a still life that doesn't stay still.
Maybe we can jump ahead and see some of that movement you were speaking about.
There's like that major dramatic point where a ball rolls in and knocks over the glass of tea. That's the big. It's very small what's taking place here.
But also, there's an attention to detail.
Take another.
Are we playing it? I think we're gonna. Yeah.
There's stab at it.
Another guess. I can't guess. Just tell me. It could be anything. A camera.
Yeah, good one.
Is it made of paper? Like a letter? Is it a letter?
Oh, come on. Well, no time like the present. I'm going to pour some wine.
What are you doing?
What?
Where's my glass? Did we pack it? I think this is Donnie's glass. It has a chip from the time that he went into that room.
I'm sorry, I know. It meant so much to have your own.
That was the glass we used, and if it broke...
I know. Now that she's not. Okay, one last time. Try to guess.
It's boring. I want to know what's in the box. Could you please tell me it now?
That's a good
Wanna
place
guess
to
what?
pause. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about this progression of time, this nonlinear progression of time, and moving between them. That theory that you present.
Yeah, I actually, in re-looking at this project later, not while I was making it, maybe not even while I did it 12 years ago, but that sense that you can toggle between times. And when I was making it, I don't know that I realized the kind of, what would be the word I'm looking for? Not authority, but the ability to move between tenses, and the ability to, and I guess reflect on your entire life, or as a young person reflect forward. Guess what it's going to be, or at the present tense, remember what things are going to be in the past. That kind of that ability for that viewer to be able to toggle between these things, where the action moves forward. And one of the things that's very nice now is that when we built this in Flash originally, you weren't able to scroll forwards and backwards in time, which was very sad. It just had to move all the way forwards from beginning to end. And now we're able to do that. So you can stop and go back and go forward. And you can scrub. That's the word that you can scrub in time. Now we can have a demonstration of scrubbing. When I was thinking about the Pinter project, but just in general, one of my fascinations with time is one of the things I get to do when I'm working on a project is I get to do it an inordinate amount of research, which just means I get to read all kinds of things that I want to be reading. And one thing leads you to the next. And one thing that I started reading about was different notions of time in different cultures. And so I'm going to read a little passage about the Aymara tribe, the Aymara people in the Andes. We might think that spatial metaphor for time is universal among humans, that places the future ahead of us and the past behind us. It may seem logical that this is based on our body's orientation and locomotion. The Aymara people from the Andes understand this the other way around. They see the past ahead of them. Let's see, I lost my place here. They see the past ahead of them and the future behind them. They gesture ahead of them when remembering things from the past, and they gesture backwards when talking about the future. The Aymara speakers note the difference between what is known and what is not known as paramount. So what is known is what you can see and is in front of you, and the past is known, and therefore it lies in front of you. And the future is unknown, so it lies behind you where you can't see it. So I always thought that was just so beautiful to think that we would think of the future being behind us. Anyway, that's one of the lucky little things that you get to do when you're doing it.
And I think that in terms of moving between the past, the present, and the future in this particular work, you move between feelings of nostalgia, of anticipation, of yearning, there's these different emotions that the temporal aspect of the project really draws forth. Another is a feeling of intimacy, even with these young people, maybe midlife people, let's say. I think that they sound as if they might be in adulthood, and then those that are a pair that is older. And yet the sense of intimacy between these two people throughout each of these moments is very present. And I think it also relates very much to the form of creating this work for the internet. You know, one is at home or wherever they are, and they have their own relationship with the work one-on-one. Very different than, say, for instance, when you would experience the play or portrayal, for instance, in the theater with others. Did that factor in, or how did you think about intimacy when you were developing this piece?
That's a good question. That's what they always say on the talk shows. That's a good question when they need more time to think about it. I would say in general, the voice that I have in my work would be actually between myself via the object, via whatever it is, and a singular audience. I don't think of large audiences. I think of singular people. And so there's always a kind of intimacy between, there's a kind of a sense of we're not in cahoots with each other, but I can be, that way you can have the subtlety be there. There's a kind of trust in the audience to be able to get through what's difficult, get through what's humorous, go through, I don't know, I think that's often the case. In this case, I didn't really, until it was over, and maybe even more so now, even know how emotionally charged the work was going to be, because I'm not a writer and I'm not a director of film, and I hadn't done this before. All of the things that I implied in the narrative, for instance, I imply that maybe the adults are clearing out this house because someone has just died and they have to go through someone's stuff, and the children are playing around, and for instance, maybe the parents aren't there for a little while and they're gonna go and out and play around or something, that there's an absence of the adults around. And then the older people, there's almost at a few times, there's a few times where maybe they have to deal with the house because one of them might be dying. It's subtle, it's not clear. It's just, again, the kind of innuendo there that's just an allusion to those things. But not being practiced in those things, and I did work with John Haskell, who's much more practiced than I am with this, but it really resonates. There's a poignancy there that I didn't really know that I was going to have, which I'm not unhappy about at all. I'm quite happy with it. I don't know if that's the answer.
Absolutely is the answer. I think it's and also the real focus, the production aspects of the piece as well. I was thinking about, as you were talking, it's just a table that's lit. It's more or less set in darkness with the casts of light on these objects on this table. And I think that it further highlights the intimacy.
Yeah, it's nowhere. I mean, this is really clear. It's in a black box. We had to build a black box of curtains around this in order to get the particular kind of lighting that we wanted to get. If you want to, there are, if you want to cast the shadows on the glasses the way we cast, the reflections on the glasses the way we have them, you can't just do that. You have to, part of it's done in After Effects, but part of it you have to, it was a very controlled situation.
Well, I'm curious too, and that control, there's a lot of different collaborators, but you're so specific in the vision. It really very much lends to of course, it definitely relates to much of your work. I can see so many threads, memory and absence, narrative. How has this influenced work since then? And and or how has the
everything changed after making this work? Maybe this was maybe I'm a little bit less nervous about specifically dealing with narrative, because I hadn't really done that so much before this. You just threw that question at me. I don't really know. Maybe you know.
I'm curious as to, there's a few different projects, but I think more specifically it's less about, individual works. And, this was a new medium for many people when we invited them to engage. From what I understand, of course, from Sarah, that many of the artists that were working in the series, it was their first time working with the internet or sort of a born digital platform.
Right.
And every project, it seems, and in this project, in front of us, it definitely resonates with the rest of your practice. And there are threads that I think anyone that knows your work well will see. I think it's primarily the absence and the memory and these emotive qualities that you really feel from these objects. And it's not even just the narrative. I think if you were to even step away and not even hear the voiceover and just watch the action on the table, I think you get a sense of that.
We talked a little bit before we started in our conversation, and in a sense, people ask me you get asked a question like, why is absence so much a part of a subject in your work? And those are the questions that I don't think you can answer. In some ways, the subjects choose the artist. And so, you're not really finished with certain subjects. But the way that objects can be imbued with meaning or with narrative or with value, or that we can take away, I've done work where there's things about doubles or things that the real one and the fake one or the broken one, or the way that we can, different ways that we individually give meaning to objects, that we give meaning and value to objects as groups, that we take value away. Like, for instance, that you see an object that has great value, and it turns out to be a fake, and then all of a sudden it has no value, or the way that we can imbue an object with all different kinds of meaning. That there could be a meaning which is highly emotional, and then at what point does that flip over to sentimentality? When does it become a cliche? All of those things are endlessly interesting to me. So this was a project that was pretty rich in all of those kind of possibilities to play with all of those subjects.
It's fascinating. I think it's also a project that on the surface it's so simple. It looks so simple, and its engagement is not so much simple, but it's very focused. And to understand and to listen to you speak about all of these nuances is it's really rich. And as you said, these objects do carry meaning. And in this particular scene, it's very personal, as are many of the objects that we have in our lives. Do you mind sharing more about what you're working on today and what is on your mind at the moment?
Yeah. I'm going to read something, because that'll lead to that. I'm going to read a little passage from part of a piece by Ben Lerner that was called The Golden Vanity, because it was uncanny when I first read this, how much resonance it had for me. So let me just read this. The unusual heat felt summery, but the light was distinctly autumnal, and the confusion of the seasons was reflected in the clothing around them. Some people were dressed in t-shirts and shorts, while others wore winter coats. It reminded him of the doubly exposed photograph or matting effect in film. Two temporalities collapsed into a single image. Eventually, he turned from the river and wandered back through Brooklyn Heights. On a small cobblestone street that dead-ended unexpectedly, some conspiracy of brickwork and chill air and gaslight gave him the momentary sense of having traveled back in time, or of distinct times being overlaid, temporalities interleaved. No, it was as if the little flame in the gaslight he paused before were burning at once in the present and in various pasts, in 2012, but also 1912 or 1852, as if it were one flame flickering simultaneously in each of those times, connecting them. He felt that anyone who would ever pause before the lamp as he was pausing was briefly coeval with him, that they were all watching the same turbulent point in their respective present tenses. Then he imagined his narrator standing before it, imagined that the gaslight cut across worlds and not just years, that the author and the narrator, while they couldn't face each other, could intuit each other's presence by facing the same light, a kind of correspondence.
Wow.
Yeah, wow is right. I just love that he is able to capture this sense of various time frames existing at the same presence. That he talks about it in each in their respective present tense, and as though those can exist at the same time, and that we could slip or toggle or whatever verb you're going to use between these different tenses and experience something in the same place. And then he goes a step further to say, well, what if these people could sense each other's presences? And then he goes even a step further to say, what if the narrator of the story, the character in the story, and the author of the story were also coeval? Anyway, so it's the sense of being able to write about those different present tenses was uncanny to me. And so very, very luckily, Ben Lerner and I are working together on a project. It's
well, mutual. Was it? How did that develop? Was it a mutual?
I was asked to, anyway, it's a long story short, but we were asked to do a project and we got in touch with each other, and it turned out that we share a lot of similar interests, and we're working on a book and maybe a museum project together. So it's very exciting to work again in time. But yeah, so yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Coming up.
It is very uncanny. And I think what is remarkable to me is at this very moment, and again, going back to how prescient the project is for me at this time, it's just, we have been operating in both suspended time, conflated time, nostalgia, memory, uncertainty. All of these feelings are compounded at this very moment. And yet we're incredibly focused on our own personal well-being and our relationships and our domestic space. And together, that's what all of this project really is so successful in bringing together. So thank you.
Thank you.
I want to have a sense of listening a little bit more to the project, and then maybe we can open it up for questions. Does that sound great? Okay.
Well, it has to fit in the box. So what would fit in the box? I just want more time.
Now that she's not. Okay. One last time. Try to guess.
You're not going to tell me.
It's always more fun if you guess.
I have guessed. My mind... I can't think of anything. Hey, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
I'm just looking to see if I can
Watch
find...
out. Please. The more you move things around, the more work we'll have when we have to. Can we just pack things? Do we have to look through everything?
I'm not going.
Can't we just be content? Enjoy where we were.
You mean where we are?
Are not. Are two. Are not. Are two. Are not. Are two. Are not. Are two. Are not. Are two.
Beautiful. Back to the beginning. Great. Let's open it up for some questions. Give people a bit of time. I think that we can maybe as we wait for questions to develop, I think that it will come in the next minute or two. Maybe it's particularly interesting to think about working with this medium, and if this is something that you felt really lended to the ideas that were coalescing at the time of development, and in particular, not just the intimacy that I talked about earlier, but the actual production and interaction with this medium.
Maybe more specific.
Just thinking your own experience working with this medium is different for everybody that's invited to the series, for instance, has a new engagement with this, with the interface of the internet and being confronted with and really developing a relationship with various publics. And then it's also incredibly specific in terms of technology and being able to translate your ideas and your vision into this domain and this particular format. And developing these tools and working with your collaborators, I'm curious as to how you approach the medium and what you found to be both something that you could translate your ideas very easily to, and or what were maybe some of the challenges that it presented.
Well, as I said before, the sense that you could have parallel running dialogues, and that it was the viewer who was able to choose how to play. It became like an instrument, and that they could choose how much to stay on one and how much to move around in terms of things. And I've heard, I've listened into or watched into different people kind of playing this like an instrument, and there are people who are really wildly going back and forth into time, and then those people would be able to get the moments of coincidence, like what are each person saying when the candle blows out, or whatever it is. So I love that sense of this. I mean, the technical part of it I had very little to do with, because I was working with such fantastic, I was working with such incredible people, from John Haskell, who was writing the text with me, to Sarah Tucker, who was organizing the entire thing, to the lighting and camera and building the whole set and sound editing, and it was remarkable to be able to, in this very, very small control. It was really a controlled little jewel of a project, and that was my experience of working with Dia. That it was just spectacular, attention to all the details of it, and people who were and the people who did the programming. It was just all just spectacular. So I would not be able to judge what it's like to work on the internet, because I've never done it since. Although looking at it again make me realize, I could actually go back and work in this medium again. It was really very interesting. Yeah.
You've recently considered, or just been revisiting the project now?
Just in the last few weeks, re-looking at things and rebuilding this, and kind of looking at the timeline of what I was doing, and I was thinking this was very interesting. But to talk about work on the internet in general, I don't know that I would have anything to. I'm not a.
I think that that's also what's so interesting about the project, that it occurred to me when we were speaking just now, that the ubiquity and the convenience of being able to record videos of your life.
Right.
And how that that was very different even 12 years ago when you made the project.
This would be much, much easier to do then. I mean, now than it was then.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to give, they're major kind of giveaways that there are things that get reflected in the glasses. And that was technically pretty complex to do at the time. It took masking and all kinds of things that would be very simple to do now, but at the time were very time consuming and very kind of at the top end of what was could be done at that moment.
I mean, it's very much a film set, correct?
Yes,
I mean,
it was a film set. This is clearly a film set.
And that level of production requires all these collaborators, and that level of detail is something.
It's very amusing to have, a film set where the character, where the stars are a bunch of grapes and stop action was, oh my God, if we take a grape out, do make sure that we don't move the grape, the rest of the grapes, because we don't want it to be like a continuity person for the grapes was pretty amusing. So, yeah.
Somebody else looks like there's somebody that raised their hand. I don't know maybe if you can put your question in the chat. I'm new to all of this, so hopefully I'm telling people to do the right thing. I think so. In the Q&A chat. Well, that's so fascinating. I was going to ask earlier if you could bring us in a little bit to the process of the production and the nuance of all the movements. I can imagine just, hours and hours you must have been spending in this particular environment.
Yeah. The filming was, a long film. It was the sound editing, and the sound editing was really, 3 different recordings, and then from the track of the visual, getting them all to link up and sync up. That was the most time consuming of the project.
It always is. It's just
much
precision that's required. Maybe you can just speak a little bit, since this is something that's been on our minds and so important. Oh, we have lots of questions coming in. I'll pause so I don't just hear from me. Oh, yes, this is a good question, one I had too. The title. It says, I think the title implicates the ethics of the viewer, or maybe you can just share more as to what the title meant for you and how you came about.
The ethics of the viewer?
It says, I think the title implicates the ethics of the viewer.
It's almost like explaining a joke or something. Explaining a title is a little bit like that. But, there's the expression, people who see things see a glass half full or see a glass half empty. And I started with half empty. I didn't want to go half full, half empty, but I just did it. I didn't want to, I reversed it. So I guess you could say that it's about the mindset that you have about what you think about life, or how, but those are the kind of poetic implications that I guess I would prefer someone to. What do you think, Kelly?
I'm curious as to the question of the implication of the ethics of the viewer. I think you've answered my question just as to how the title came about, and I think it does create a positionality of one's memory.
I mean, for me, titling works is really one of the more pleasurable and more difficult parts of doing the work.
Yeah.
I almost always have titles for my works.
I have a couple. Sorry.
Go ahead. No.
There are 2 more questions, and they're really quite good. So I'm gonna jump in, and if you don't mind. One is, I am newish to your work, but 2 projects that stand out to me are the one, rendering in Oberlin for the 2018 Front Triennial, and 2, Tip of the Iceberg. And I was wondering if you would want to talk about either project. Both seem to stand out as sort of a mapping of literal and historical and effective space and time. Whew. It goes on too, but I think, maybe just touching on those two projects and their relationship to time and experience.
The tip of the iceberg, it's kind of hard to talk about these works without any visual thing there, because that would be a lot of description. But the tip of the iceberg is a work that I imagine being sort of on the cusp of being science fiction. It takes place in a space that you have to move into has a false floor and a false ceiling, and a round table that's in it that's stacked up with plates, and there's light coming from below and there's light coming from above, and you kind of have a sense of that kind of beam me down Scotty sci-fi sense of being in some non-real space. Without going into too much of the detail of it, the images that are on the bottoms of all the cutlery, all the crockery that's stacked up, you can see in a mirror, and they're all objects that would have been on the Titanic. So that's all the stuff that would be at the bottom of the sea from the Titanic. And then when you look above, there's a domed ceiling, and then all the stuff that's the decorative stucco work are objects that astronauts have left up in space. So it's this kind of invisible debris fields, socket wrenches and Hasselblad cameras and stuff that are all rotating up in space, and all of this stuff which is very poignantly at the bottom of the sea. So I just thought of these things as kind of like magnetic ends of the same thing. That's the tip of the iceberg. And then the rendering, that's even more difficult to describe, but I imagine that it's from works at the Allen Museum in Oberlin. It's all images from many, many different cultures from their collection, all of which are dealing somehow with architecture. And it's a very complicated architectural space that the exhibition's in. And I imagine that the images that are on the walls, everything is sort of framed out in everything is painted this kind of very light, ethereal gray. And that all of the objects reversed rendered themselves off of the walls and into the rooms, so that what's depicted in the images is then three-dimensional, projected off of the wall into the room. So you get this kind of very strange scaled miniature golf course that you have to walk through, as though these things at night, while we weren't there, thought themselves off the walls and into the room, and this is what they would look like in 3D. So I don't know if that's helpful or not helpful.
They did qualify they clarified rather about it being, let's see.
To talk about time in relationship to those pieces?
No, but I'm just actually going up, and as I was doing that, I saw one interesting question, which might be actually all the questions are really interesting, but I thought maybe we could end with this one. Mm-hmm. The loneliness of the project is uncannily relevant to our moment today. How has this present moment, which we touched on a little bit, changed your reading of the work? Has it changed it at all in revisiting it over the last 3 weeks, given all we've gone through in the last several months?
I think when I made this work 12 years ago, it was probably a more philosophical project than I imagined it actually to turn out to be. I was interested in time. I was interested in the way that time could be conflated. I was interested in the way that things can be synchronous. I was interested in all of those things on a maybe perhaps more intellectual level. And in making of the project, it became more narrative and more poignant. And in looking back on it now, the sense of how one reflects on the future and how one reflects on the past and how difficult that is to do, and how being stuck in present, being stuck in nostalgia, being stuck in the present, being stuck in the future, which we all are, as a kind of tool for thinking about those things is quite uncanny for me as well. I remember a friend, when he saw this project, when we launched it at DIA, and I remember a friend had tears in his eyes when he was looking at it, and I thought, wow, I didn't realize that at the time that was happening. But now at this moment, but that's maybe true for many works, that they're in such an emotionally charged moment where we don't know what the world's going to be next week, literally. We're not allowed to use the word literally, but literally we don't know what the world is going to be like next week. It does take on strong meaning.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Really appreciate this, and it's I think it's a project that will continue to have relevance and be prescient throughout our lives. I think as we all contend with absence and presence and nostalgia and uncertainty, it will continue to have impact on us. And I appreciate you taking the time to share more. And if anybody else has any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to us directly, and we're happy to answer them. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.